We are back.
And you do not sound too happy about it.
You still have an axe to grind over that whole pizza thing of yours.
You have an axe to grind. You can't let it go.
Listen, I can still see the appeal in bar pizza, and since the South Shore was my second home, my loyalty has to lie there and not with your stinking beach pizza.
You don't even eat pizza.
I eat pizza once every few years.
Well, I eat it, and so do our listeners. And so did Richie and Jack, I will remind you.
Oh my God, Lorenzo's down in Wareham. It's still there. They used to like to go to the drive-in with the car hops.
Feeding the birds and plotting.
Their favorite pastime. Moving on from pizza and plotting, do we have any questions today?
Yes, so we have a few questions. First of all, when did Frankie Salemi get inducted into the New England Mafia, and what about Frankie's brother Jackie?
Do you remember back in 1967, the feds reported in a 302 that an informant said that Raymond wanted to make Stevie, Flemmy, and Frankie?
Yeah, and I still kind of think that was Stevie bragging.
Well, I do too, but
Frankie had an Irish, unlike Stevie, Frankie had an Irish mother.
And the books were closed. And although Frankie was eventually labeled the boss of New England, I don't believe he was ever formally inducted, nor his brother.
Okay, well, let's see if any of our listeners have any other info that they want to share about that. And we have one more question. David asked, will you be looking at the mob war between the Salemi and Russo factions in Boston in the 90s?
David, we're going to have dozens of episodes about the 90s mob war next year.
And thank you, David, for sharing Bobby Louisi's testimony with us. But you're not getting off that easy. David has one more question that's related.
I know, the Rossetti Alliance question. And David, we adore you, but you're going to have to wait for the next episode for that answer.
And next season. But please keep the questions coming. And Lara was finally able to get our emails back, so now they're showing up in our inboxes. And sorry if we missed anything you sent. If we didn't respond, please try emailing either of us again.
And thanks to everyone for sharing their comments with us, as always. And if you don't want to share them publicly, feel free to email either of us also. Okay, now let's give a recap of what was going on in the world of organized crime in New England at the beginning of 1981. On February 19th, 1965, Raymond Baby Curcio was found shot to death behind the wheel of his car in Providence, Rhode Island. His fatal mistake was robbing Raymond Patriarca's brother, Joe's house. 16 years would pass before any arrests were made. As had become the norm, Raymond and Rudy Sciarra were charged.
And as usual, there was an informant to testify against them. Unlike in the later murder of Mafia and Malay, where the alleged planner, Jack Red Kelly, served as the government's main witness, this time they had the actual shooter, Nicky Boy Palmigiano, as the star witness. And as in the previous trial, the Rhode Island State Police lined the courtroom dressed in black fatigues and armed with pistols, shotguns, and bayonets. Palmigiano testified that Dickie Cali acted as the initiator of the meeting between himself and Raymond, and he claimed that the by then deceased Dickie was directly involved in the hit, and Rudy Sciarra provided the weapons.
Well, Nicky didn't just testify about Raymond directing him to kill Curcio, he also went down the Let's Kill Castro story rabbit hole.
After Red Kelly told Partington that story, everyone ran with it.
Well, that's how Jack Pro, Dad, and company ended up in the JFK documents, and Dad always swore that there was some truth to that story, so who knows. Back to Palmigiano. In exchange for his testimony, he was granted immunity for the murders of Curcio, Robert Candos in 1968, and a Brinks guard named John Glendinning, who was killed during a botched armored truck heist in 1969. He was shipped off with a new identity after the trial as part of the Witness Protection Program.
Yeah, well, they would have made a deal with the devil to put Raymond behind bars. He managed to stay out of prison, but Rudy was convicted as an accessory to murder and had to serve 10 years before being eligible for parole. Okay, now let's move on to the homicides that took place in 1981. The first one we are highlighting today is 29-year-old Ronnie Davis, who was stabbed to death by Anthony Malerba while serving a sentence in Walpole on March 2nd, in what was the first murder in the prison that year. An autopsy showed that he had been stabbed multiple times in his upper back. 3 shanks were discovered in the search of the cell block following the slaying. According to the Norfolk County Assistant DA, Ronnie had likely been murdered over drugs. He had been transferred to Walpole in December after spending 4 months at Concord on a 10-year sentence for burglary. I don't know why they transferred him. Was Concord really that unsafe?
No, usually it would be the opposite, so it's kind of strange that they moved him, but probably he ended up having some problem with someone or he created a problem and they shipped him out there. And for our listeners who don't know, Ronnie was the son of Edward Davis and Olga Sciulli, and I don't know if I pronounced that right, so forgive me if I didn't, and brother of Debra Davis, the girlfriend of Stevie Flemmi, who too would be killed that year.
Okay, well, we'll discuss Deborah's murder a little later. The Davis family endured more than a handful of twists and fate and tragedies over the years. They were longtime residents of the projects and lived near the Flemmis. Ronnie's father, Edward, was born in 1928, the oldest child of John Edward Davis and Julia Agnes Walsh. But John Edward Davis wasn't actually a Davis, but had been born in about 1900 as John Edward Amy in Wyoming, Pennsylvania, the son of John Amy and Elizabeth Hope.
In late 1920, John Edward Amy got into trouble with the law and went on the lam to Massachusetts, where he changed his name to Davis. He settled down, married, and had 8 kids.
Exactly. Okay, so let's get back to Ron. In April of 73, he was arrested on charges of assault with intent to murder. He was accused of shooting at James Perry 6 times with a .22 after a dispute over money. Perry was arrested a few days later when he appeared in Brookline court to testify against Ronnie Davis.
In June 1975, Ronnie and Deborah's father, Edward Davis, was found by the Coast Guard floating face down in the Boston Harbor. His boat had been abandoned not too far away. He wasn't even 50 years old and left behind a widow, 10 children, including Ronnie and Debra.
Edward Davis's death was deemed an accident, but I just kind of wonder, maybe we can circle back around to that when we talk about Deborah's murder later. Okay, back to Ronnie's slaying in Walpole. 2 months later, DA William Dillahunt announced that he had indicted Anthony Malerba for the stabbing. Previously, in March of 75, Malerba pleaded guilty to manslaughter charges. He was accused of killing 2 Deer Island escapees the previous July. He was just 16 years old, but tried as an adult. According to his side of the story, the 2 escapees had shown up at a friend's apartment and an argument ensued. His friend, Michael DeLisi, urged him to go home and retrieve a gun. Malerba testified that when he returned, he fired 1 shot before DeLisi grabbed the gun from him and started shooting. Both the escapees were fatally wounded, dying later at the Mass General Hospital. DeLisi walked, but Malerba copped to the plea deal and ended up at Walpole at the age of 16.
Anthony Malerba himself would end up a murder victim in 1993 after becoming caught up in the mob war of the early 90s.
The authorities said that Malerba's murder was reminiscent of Richie Castucci's murder in 76, and his body was found in the snow near the square just feet from where Castucci was found. And like Castucci, the next gangland slaying victim we are discussing, Angelo Patrizzi, was also found in the trunk of an abandoned car, wrapped in a sleeping bag. His badly decomposed body was found on June 11th in the Harbor House parking lot in Lynn. The car's license plates matched a car that had been stolen in East Boston earlier that year in March. He still had on the shamrock pin that was likely what he was wearing the last day he was seen, which was March 15th during the St. Patty's Day parade in South Boston.
Patrizzi had been hogtied and strangled himself to death against the restraints. The police said they believe he had been killed at least 3 weeks earlier. His body wasn't identified until June 18th. The identification was confirmed by a bullet that was lodged in his spine from a previous shooting. In 1971, Angelo was at a bar in Charlestown with his girlfriend when another patron started shooting. The fragments of a bullet that lodged in his spine at the base of his brain were inoperable. In the aftermath, he began medicating with drugs and alcohol, which those who knew him said impaired his cognition and his judgment.
Angelo was 3 years into his sentence when his brother Joe was murdered. We covered Joe's murder in the hit parade of 78, which occurred shortly after Joe had been released from prison.
We need to clear up the status of Joe and Angelo being full brothers and not half brothers.
Yes, because Joe was using Porter as a surname from time to time. The press and the courts ran with the idea that they were half brothers.
Exactly. Joe was born in Lynn, Mass. in October of 1940, and Angelo was born in January of 1940, both to Helen and Joseph Patrizzi. They had an older sister also. Helen Patrizzi filed for divorce in January of 1946 and got custody of all 3 children.
Okay, now that we've cleared that up, let's get back to Angelo's murder. Patrizzi was released from Bridgewater into a work release program on January 26, 1981, just around the same time that wiretaps were placed in Jerry Angelo's office at 98 Prince Street and 51 North Margin Street. Angelo got a job at Al's Surf Auto Body through Freddie. Did we decide it's Simone, right? Freddie
Simone.
Simone.
Yep.
The same place that his brother Joe had been working when he was killed. The authorities later surmised that Angelo had deliberately sought Simone out in order to exact revenge on the people he blamed for his older brother Joe's death. But Simone was setting up Patrizzi on orders from Sammy Granito, who was acting on orders from Jerry Angulo. Reportedly, Simone tried to set Angelo up to be killed on 3 separate occasions, but Patrizzi always managed to slip away. After the 3rd attempt, Patrizzi must have realized that he couldn't risk it and went on the lam. Now he had both the authorities and the Mafia looking for him.
Angelo's disappearance probably wouldn't have been pursued if it hadn't been for the wiretap that picked up several conversations. 8 days after Angelo went underground, Sammy Granito dragged Freddie Simone to Jerry Angelo's and made Freddie confess. Quote, "You explain, huh? Just what happened. He wants to know why the kid got away from you. I had him with me a couple of times driving around, an hour at a time. I got him a suit, I got him a jacket, a top coat. Suddenly he didn't want to come around no more." Freddie had nothing but excuses, and Jerry decided it was time to call in the big guns, Larry Zanino. The following day, on March 12th, the Wire picked up another disjointed conversation between Jerry and Larry. Long story short, Larry concluded, "We got to kill this guy,
In defense of the feds, they probably couldn't make heads or tails of the conversation, but eventually they figured out that Angelo Patrizzi was the marked man. Allegedly, they passed on the warning to the Stadies, but since we all know by now that there was no love lost between the two groups, that claim is dubious at best.
And the feds should have been used to the cryptic conversations by then. I mean, they've been listening for, 2 decades at that point, and it was always the same conversation. I used to listen to, "So did you hear about the guy up the street?" "What guy?" The guy who did that thing." "You mean the guy who was with the guy from out of town?" Yeah, that guy." And you know me, I'm sitting there eavesdropping, trying to figure out who the hell the guy was always.
Sure, your head was spinning.
Drove me freaking crazy. Anyhow, Angelo's murder was never discussed again on the wiretap at 98 Prince Street. However, on April 13th, 1 month after Angelo pulled his runner, the Wire at 51 North Margin Street picked up a conversation between Zanino, Ralph LaMattina, and Johnny Cincotti. And I get to do the dialogue and I get to swear now. I'm so excited about this. Larry, Now, Johnny, I told you, didn't I? Cincotti, yeah? Larry, about Joe Porter's brother. Cincotti, no. Larry, well, they clipped him. Ralph, oh, that's it. Larry, don't say a fucking word now. Cincotti, did they find him? Larry, no, they didn't fucking find him. They put him in his trunk. 9 of them. They lugged him in from the fucking top coat. 9 fucking guys. He went in for a top coat, and 9 of them did it. Sonny did. Sonny boy. All the fucking troublemakers, and he's in the trunk. The super boss had to tell me on the QT. Jerry says, I got to tell you something. They clipped Joe Porter's brother. Larry, listen to me now. Listen what he says. Got him in his fucking trunk. Ralph, it's been 10 days now. Larry, but they got him. Freddie was scared to death the kid would have clipped him in 2 fucking minutes. Ralph, he wanted to clip Freddie. They wanted to.
Larry in his mouth.
Oh, yeah.
So the Wire was finally discontinued about a month later in May. Enough damage had been done. Jerry Angulo would eventually be sentenced to life for ordering Patrizzi's murder. In 1987, Freddie Simone admitted that he had participated in the murder of Angelo Patrizzi and was later sentenced to 15 to 20 years. In 2016, Price Quintana was also convicted and sentenced to 7.5 years. Others were accused and threatened with charges, and I feel like everyone was accused of the murder at some point.
It was a long list for sure, and we will come back to it when we wrap up this season and in the beginning of season 3. Now let's move on to Debra Davis. She was last seen on September 17th, and according to later testimony, was murdered by Stevie Flemmi and Whitey Bulger on September 21st. Due to Kevin Weeks' assistance, Debra's body was finally recovered in 2001.
As we mentioned earlier, she was the sister of Ronnie Davis, and their cousin was Liz McDonough, who was shot in the head in a North End bar room while waiting for her boyfriend, Nicky Gizzo. You can hear that story in episode 36 about the Lancaster Street garage.
And Liz survived that. Their other brother, Robert, later told the press father disapproved of their relationship from day one, but he died in 75. Once he was gone, no one could do anything about it. And
Yeah, well, as we said earlier, the family had more than their share of tragedies, and I personally think that Edward Davis was also murdered. Stevie Flemmi copped to participating in Debra's murder as part of his 2003 plea deal, but he blamed Whitey for it. The Davis family were awarded $350,000 for pain and suffering nearly 3 decades later in 2009. However, Whitey Bulger was found not guilty of Debra's murder in 2013, despite the fact that Stevie Flemmi testified against him.
remember, I don't think Flemmi could even identify Whitey in the courtroom by that point. No justice. It's awful.
Well, I think we should come back to Debra's story next season when we cover the demise of Stevie and company.
I agree. So that brings us to another tragic family story. On October 13th, 34-year-old Georgie Pappas was shot once in the face and killed in Harry Mooks's Four Seas restaurant on Tyler Street in Chinatown in Boston. Georgie's son Chucky would meet a similar end in the doorway of his Braintree home in November of 1995.
Hey, you knew Chucky, didn't you?
Yeah, Chucky was close to Mello Merlino. Dad and Mello were friendly with Georgie, so when Mello got out of the can, and I want to say 88, I would occasionally go to TRC with Dad, and it had to be 88 because Mello went to the can when I was a year old, and he did 18 years. Dad brought him to my job to meet me when he'd just gotten out. He said, quote, Jesus, Richie, she looks just like Anne, which was my mother, but we'll save all that for next season.
Yeah, our new mantra, next season. Okay,
Yes.
Let's give some of Georgie's backstory. He had been charged with drug distribution twice. The first time was in March of 78 when Judge Garrity sentenced him to 5 years in federal prison for distributing cocaine. In July of 81, while out on parole, he was arrested again, this time with Anthony Zip Zerpolo of Blackfriars fame, Jerry Angulo associate Charles Tashian, and 23 others for PCP, aka angel dust, and cocaine distribution.
And more importantly, Walpole inmates Thomas Garrow and Mello Merlino.
Hey, well, you said George and Mello were friendly, just not how friendly.
Listen, Mello is buying Disney stickers on the state's dime for their drug baggies that they distribute in the jail so everyone knew what brand dope they were getting.
Hey, we still have to do that prison episode.
And I promised we'd get to it, and we will.
Okay. Georgie Pappas pleaded guilty to selling 2 ounces of coke to a federal informant who I guess still remains unidentified, and was sentenced to another 5 years, but was out on bail when he was killed.
Just 16 days after Georgie's murder, Brian Halloran was arraigned on first-degree murder and held on $200,000 bail. But as many of our listeners already know, Halloran cut himself a deal and would never make it to trial.
Okay, save it for the highlight episode.
I know. John Salemi, Frankie's brother, was convicted of Georgie's murder, but in 1985, the verdict was overturned due to a lack of evidence. No one else was ever tried.
I feel like a broken record sometimes saying unsolved and no one was convicted. But not in the case of tattoo parlor owner Dennis Roche, who was slain on December 4th.
You know that the tattoo parlor was in Olneyville?
Hey, that's right, Mike Ross in the hit parade of 77. And who would imagine a place named Olneyville could be the home of such happenings?
It makes me think of the Grinch in Whoville.
Okay, well, since it happened near Christmas time, but don't take us down that rabbit hole.
Relax, I'm not going there. We briefly touched on Dennis Roche in episode 29, which was the final part of the hit parade of 1977. Anthony DeSantis was convicted in June of 1984 for his murder. The prosecution said that DeSantis or DeSantis, do you know?
I don't. I
I'm
think
going
I've heard both.
to stick with DeSantis at the moment. Killed Roche because he believed that Roche was responsible for the disappearance of his brother Rocky.
I mean, he probably was, and it's kind of a rehash of the Patrizzi murders, but it ended differently here. In this case, Dennis Roche's body was discovered in a dump in Providence. According to the deputy medical examiner, Arthur Burns, Roche had died from a gunshot wound to the trunk. He had suffered a second gunshot wound, several stab wounds, and injuries to the face and head consistent with having been run over by a car.
And since we are in Rhode Island, I want to mention that on December 20th, Ralph DeMasi was charged with plotting to blow up Judge Gallant's home, even though he had been acquitted of the charges of the 1974 hit on Joe Schiavone.
Yeah, well, he should have been acquitted because he was in the can when Schiavone was killed, but even Ralph DeMasi couldn't remember that.
I can't.
Not to mention his attorney. Okay, back in Massachusetts, on the same day Ralph was charged with the bomb plot, the Boston Police Department responded to a person shot at 222 West 9th Street in South Boston. The victim was later identified as Harold Allan Matloff, aged 56. It was determined to be a homicide by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. Matloff had been shot in the head through the plastic shield that was supposed to protect him from his passenger. He had been working as a cabbie on the weekends to supplement his income. His paid-off home had been severely damaged in the blizzard of '78, and he had borrowed tens of thousands of dollars for repairs. The cabbie job was his third source of income. Matloff eventually succumbed to his wounds 8 days later at Boston City Hospital.
The cabbies protested the lack of protection. People forget, myself included, just how dangerous it was to drive a cab back in those days. They were victims of robberies and worse, like in Matloff's case. Matloff was not connected with organized crime in any way, but we decided to include his story today.
Well, it was a completely senseless murder. The president of the Independent Taxi Operators told the Boston Globe, "We're like sitting ducks out there, and something has got to be done, and soon. We want protection, and we're going to get it one way or another." Boston Police Commissioner Joseph Jordan promised that the cabbies would be allowed to carry tear gas if they applied for permission. Over 1,000 cabbies had been robbed that year in Boston. Not as bad as New York City, but pretty close.
Matloff's killer was brought to justice 18 years later. In August of 1999, Suffolk County prosecutors charged Michael Ducoing with Matloff's murder. The 33-year-old was already doing a federal bid in New York for bank robbery. According to the prosecution, the then 16-year-old had hailed Matloff's taxi shortly after midnight in Southie and then shot his victim.
By the end of 1981, there were 210 homicides in the state of Massachusetts, and 53 of those still remain unsolved.
The next episode is going to be a little bit out of our typical subject matter.
Okay, but not too far out of it. H. Paul Rico will be coming out of retirement to pose as mafioso Frank Romano in the undercover op to take down Judge Alcee Hastings.
It all sounds so dramatic. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Bye.
Bye.